In the dim light of an ancient library, dust motes drift like suspended galaxies. The scent of parchment and candle wax lingers, the weight of centuries pressed between pages bound in cracked leather. Somewhere, beyond the reach of the flame, a hand brushes the outline of forgotten letters. They are not words meant for casual reading. They are fragments of a code, a language that once sought to bridge the gulf between matter and spirit. Before the age of machines, before circuits hummed and steel breathed fire, there were whispers that clay itself could stir, that human hands might awaken what only the divine had the right to shape. We begin, as all myths do, with silence, the kind that precedes creation. In that silence rests the question that has haunted humanity since it first looked upon its reflection in still water. What does it mean to give life? The story of the Golem does not belong to the realm of monsters, nor of miracles alone. It dwells in the space between, in the uneasy echo of reverence and rebellion. To speak of the Golem is to speak of protection, of desperation, of the fragile boundary between creation and creator. Across the centuries, the Golem has remained a paradox, an emblem of divine imitation and human vulnerability. It is said that in the ancient world, words held power, that the act of naming was itself an act of making. The letters of the Hebrew alphabet were not symbols, but living vessels, each carrying a spark of the cosmos. From these letters, the world was shaped. And so, within Jewish mysticism, a question arose. If words could build reality, could they also breathe life into the lifeless? The legends begin not in one place, but in many, scattered like shards of broken pottery across the Jewish diaspora. In the quiet academies of medieval scholars, in candlelit rooms where mystics traced letters in the air, the idea took form, a being molded from earth, animated by the secret names of God. Not a creature of rage, but a servant of need, born not from hubris, but from fear. For those who told the story were often a people besieged, facing exile, violence, and erasure. The Golem was not merely myth, it was a wish cast into clay, that something, anything, might rise to stand between the vulnerable and the world that sought to destroy them. Imagine the scene. A rabbi bent over a basin of water, murmuring verses known to few. Around him, disciples hold their breath. The words come not from imagination, but from tradition, sacred syllables encoded in secrecy. Outside, the city sleeps beneath a shroud of suspicion and persecution. Within, the air thickens with the gravity of intent. He gathers clay from the riverbank, shaping it with deliberate hands, the way one might sculpt hope itself. The figure that emerges is crude yet human. Arms, legs, a face unformed by expression. It lies still, a shadow of what it might become. And then, upon its brow, the rabbi inscribes truth, emet, the Hebrew word for life and truth intertwined. In some versions, he slips a parchment into its mouth, upon which rests the unspeakable name, Shem HaMepharash, the explicit name of God. The chamber quakes, the clay stirs, breath where there was none. Silence, broken by movement. The guardian awakens. But we must step back. To understand this act, this fusion of mysticism and matter, we must enter the world of Kabbalah, Jewish esoteric thought. In it, the universe is understood as a cascade of divine emanations, sephirot, through which the infinite reveals itself in finite forms. Creation is not a single event, but an unfolding, a divine breath continuously exhaled into existence. Humanity, made in the image of God, mirrors this creative impulse. Yet imitation is perilous. To create life, even symbolically, is to step into sacred territory, to trace the contours of divine prerogative. Thus, the Golem is both miracle and warning, a story of power obtained at a cost, of faith tested by the weight of its own daring. In the chronicles of folklore, the golem is rarely a creature of violence at first. It is obedient, even gentle. It performs tasks, protects its people, and stands as a mute sentinel against injustice. But legends, like humans, evolve. The very act of giving life implies the risk of losing control. What begins as protection may end as peril. The same power that shields can also destroy. So the tale darkens. The golem grows stronger, perhaps too strong. The rabbi, fearing the thing he has summoned, must reverse the act of creation. By erasing a single letter from Emet, leaving Met dead, he returns the creature to dust. In the flickering lamplight, clay collapses into itself, and silence reclaims what audacity awakened. What survives is not merely the legend, but the question it embodies. Did such a creature ever exist in truth? The historian may scoff, the mystic may smile. The answer matters less than the longing beneath it, a yearning to believe that in times of despair, the powerless could summon a guardian of their own making. For in every retelling, the golem is less a monster than a mirror. It reflects the fears and hopes of its makers. The human wish to command chaos and to be protected from it in the same breath. Centuries later, scholars still debate the origins of this myth. Some trace it to the Talmudic idea of Adam Afar min Adamah, man formed from the dust of the earth. Others see echoes of early mystical practices, where adepts sought to animate homunculi through meditative recitation of the divine names. Whatever its root, the golem persists because it speaks to something eternal. Our hunger to shape the world not just in our image, but to our will. And yet, every time we approach that threshold, we sense the danger that waits beyond it. The golem's clay body is symbolic of fragility, yet its story endures because it is fundamentally about the human condition. We are, in a sense, golems ourselves, animated earth, shaped by forces we only partly comprehend. The mystics who whispered of clay guardians were not merely telling tales, they were wrestling with theology, ethics, and survival. They lived in worlds where the line between existence and annihilation could vanish overnight. To create a golem was to defy that erasure, to say, "We will not be silenced." Every handful of clay was an act of resistance molded into form. Archaeologists, historians, and theologians have long searched for tangible traces, manuscripts, marginalia, coded references hidden within prayer books. In the archives of Prague, fragments of letters speak of a servant of the clay, a being of protection commanded by righteous men. Whether these are metaphor or memory remains uncertain. But in the imagination of a people, certainty is not required. The legend fills the gaps history leaves behind. And in those gaps, the golem stands tall, a figure both comforting and uncanny, born of faith, yet shaped by fear. Picture the narrow streets of medieval Europe, cobblestones slick with rain, lanterns flickering in the mist. Whispers travel faster than footsteps. Accusations of blood libel, threats of pogroms, rumors of forbidden magic. In such times, legends were not luxuries, they were shields. To believe that a protector of clay might rise in the night was to reclaim a fragment of agency. When the world offered no justice, imagination supplied its own defender. The golem became the embodiment of that hope, silent, steadfast, incorruptible. And yet, there is a melancholy in its silence. Unlike human protectors, it cannot speak, cannot reason, cannot love. It acts because it must. It obeys commands without question. Its loyalty is pure, but its understanding is absent. The rabbis who told its story understood the irony, a being made to serve justice, yet unable to comprehend it. In that contradiction lies the moral weight of the myth. Creation without consciousness is power without wisdom. A lesson that echoes far beyond the walls of the ghetto and the centuries of persecution. The legend of the Golem, then, is not only a tale of magic, it is a meditation on responsibility. To animate clay is to assume the burden of its actions. The rabbi's words, inscribed upon the brow, are not mere decoration. They are command, control, covenant. Remove the word, and life ceases. Leave it, and life continues, perhaps beyond intention. It is a delicate balance, one that mirrors humanity's own dance with creation itself. We too build, invent, and breathe life into the inanimate. We too risk losing control of what we set in motion. As the centuries rolled forward, the story traveled, carried by exiles, scholars, and storytellers. Each retelling reshaped the clay, adapting the myth to new fears and new frontiers. In Prague, the golem was a protector. In later tales, it became a warning. In modern times, it is metaphor, the ancestor of artificial life, the spiritual forebear of machines that think and act without soul. But here, in the beginning, it remains what it always was. A silent sentinel molded from desperation and devotion, the candle gutters. The last echo of the rabbi's prayer fades into stillness. Outside, the world stirs, unaware that within the quiet sanctum of faith and fear, something impossible has been dreamed into being. The clay cools, awaiting purpose. The legend has begun its long journey through time. Outside the old quarter, dawn creeps over rooftops streaked with soot and frost. The city, still drowsy from centuries of unrest, exhales. In the quiet between bells, the story lingers, half believed, half feared. The golem has vanished back into rumor, but its imprint remains, pressed invisibly into the minds of those who once whispered its name. For every generation that retold the tale added a new layer of meaning, as though each word were another hand smoothing fresh clay over an older form. Some said the creature still slept in an attic, its body preserved beneath dust and prayer shawls, awaiting a world desperate enough to wake it again. Others claimed that the legend itself was the real guardian, that by remembering the story, by speaking it aloud, the people kept their sense of protection alive when no earthly power would defend them. Myth, after all, can be armor. A story told often enough becomes a wall against despair. Scholars in later centuries searched the archives of Prague and Krakow, the letters of mystics and rabbis, the notebooks of alchemists who had borrowed Hebrew sigils for their own experiments. What they found were glimpses, never proof. Marginal notes describing the servant of clay, sermons warning against human pride, poems that imagined the golem as both savior and shadow. Each fragment revealed less about an actual creature and more about the inner landscape of a people under siege. To create life from earth was not an act of arrogance, it was a theological argument written in mud. A statement that faith, when cornered, can still shape miracles. Across medieval Europe, Jewish communities lived in a delicate balance, tolerated yet distrusted, necessary yet resented. In such tension, imagination turned inward, seeking safety in the mysteries of text. Words became sanctuaries. The letters of Scripture were not merely sounds, but forces, lines of energy that structured the universe itself. To rearrange them was to risk cosmic consequence, to blur the boundary between prayer and power. The mystics who spoke of golems were not dabbling in sorcery. They were exploring the mathematics of creation. In their eyes, language was the world's DNA, and to pronounce the right combination of names might reorder reality itself. But even in their most daring speculations, the sages wrapped caution around every syllable. The Talmud warned that to create a man from dust without a soul was possible but perilous, an imitation of divine artistry missing the breath of God. The golem, therefore, stood at the crossroads of theology, proof that humans could echo the Creator, and proof that they should not. Its silence was not absence, but warning. It moved, but it did not speak. It obeyed, but it did not pray. It was life without consciousness, faith without reflection, a mirror showing what happens when creation forgets its purpose. Night after night, the story would be told beside the glow of candles, each teller reshaping the details. In one version, the golem grew vast and unstoppable, its footsteps shaking the city. In another, it was gentle, carrying water for the poor, standing watch by the synagogue doors. These contradictions never needed resolving. Myth thrives on ambiguity. The more uncertain its meaning, the more room it leaves for belief. And belief was the true engine of the legend, the quiet conviction that somewhere between clay and word, human beings might glimpse the divine pattern that binds all things together. The centuries turned. Printing presses replaced scribes, revolutions replaced kings, but the golem endured, a relic of an age when words still glowed with holiness. Rational minds dismissed it as superstition, yet the idea refused to fade. It resurfaced in romantic poetry, in occult treatises, in the whispered dreams of those who feared the mechanized future. The industrial age, with its new forms of lifeless labor, found in the golem a metaphor waiting to be reborn. Factories filled with human figures repeating motions without thought, clay animated by command. The myth had slipped its sacred origins to speak again, this time of modernity's own creations. And still, in every retelling, one image persisted, a being molded by desperate hands, a protector made from the very earth beneath the persecuted. The golem is at once the simplest and the most profound of symbols. It asks, if suffering can fashion a guardian, might compassion itself be a creative act? The rabbis who dreamed it knew that the world could be cruel and that justice, at times, required imagination to survive. Their clay giant was not a rebellion against God, but a plea addressed to him, a prayer given form and mass. The myth also carried a subtler truth, one that would echo through philosophy and science alike, that knowledge without humility courts disaster. To write the name of God upon clay is to assume an impossible responsibility. In the legend's final act, when the rabbi erases a letter and the creature crumbles, the gesture is both merciful and tragic, a recognition that creation must sometimes be undone for order to return. The dust that settles afterward is not defeat, it is closure. Faith has tested its limits and, having learned, withdraws. Centuries later, visitors to Prague still trace their steps to the old synagogue, searching the shadows of its attic for a shape that never quite materializes. Guides lower their voices. Children peer upward into the gloom. Whether they believe or not hardly matters. What they encounter in that silence is older than the city itself. The human impulse to tell stories that protect us from the darkness we cannot name. The golem may be gone, but the space it once occupied remains sacred, a reminder that every act of imagination is also an act of preservation. The camera of our mind pulls back from the dim attic to the broader sweep of history. The legend of the clay guardian stands at the threshold of mysticism and memory, ready to lead us deeper into the labyrinth of Jewish thought where the spark of creation first flickered. Ahead lies the world of letters and light, of hidden names and divine architecture, the realm where scholars sought not monsters, but meaning, where the dream of shaping life began in whispers of prayer and geometry. And so, as dawn brightens the old stones, we leave the sleeping guardian behind and turn toward that inner world of mystics who believed that every word was a seed of creation. There, in the glow of sacred language, the story of the golem will find its origin, not in clay, but in thought itself. In the hush of a candlelit study, where shadows twist along the walls like slow-moving spirits, the story of creation takes on a new dimension. Here, the letters of the Hebrew alphabet hover in the mind as more than mere symbols. They are vessels of power, instruments through which the ineffable might be glimpsed. Every stroke of ink, every careful arrangement of consonant and vowel is a trace of the divine architecture of the universe. In this world, knowledge is not inert. Knowledge is a current, a breath, a pulse that can awaken the sleeping forms of matter. Kabbalah, the mystical heart of Jewish thought, offers the blueprint. It speaks of the Sephirot, the 10 emanations through which the infinite expresses itself in finite reality. These are not abstractions, but channels of energy, bridges between the unknowable and the tangible. In contemplating them, mystics understood that creation is a reflection, a dialogue between God and the human soul. And if humans are made in the image of God, what prevents them? Guided by discipline and sacred knowledge, from echoing the act of creation itself. The earliest whispers of the Golem are woven into this fabric of thought. To form a being from clay is to enact a microcosm of the divine process. The mystic traces letters with fingers trembling, pronouncing names hidden from the uninitiated, the syllables vibrating like unseen strings that reverberate across reality. It is a meticulous endeavor, not for spectacle, but for protection. For the communities who nurtured these practices, peril was constant, and the desire to shield oneself or one's people from injustice was urgent. To summon a golem is, in essence, to channel the creative impulse into defense, a prayer rendered in form and mass. Consider the concept of Shem HaMeforash, the explicit, unspoken name of God. In Kabbalistic teaching, it is the ultimate tool, the key to life itself, a string of sacred consonants that contains within it the blueprint of existence. To speak or write it is to wield immense power, a power both luminous and perilous. The rabbis who engaged with these letters were not conjurers of fable. They were mathematicians of the spirit, architects of unseen realities. In their hands, clay becomes more than soil. It is potential, a waiting vessel for divine spark, and the act of inscription is an act of communion. The interplay between human and divine creativity is delicate. Every mystic understood that imitation is never neutral. To bring forth life without wisdom risks catastrophe. Yet the act is also an expression of faith. Faith that the human mind can align with cosmic order, that morality and intention can guide the formidable forces of creation. It is this tension between aspiration and caution that animates the Golem myth in its earliest form. The creature is neither tool nor deity. It exists in the liminal space where devotion intersects with necessity. In these ancient teachings, creation is recursive. God breathes into the world. Humans, created in that divine image, may breathe back into clay. The act of giving motion to inert matter is, simultaneously, an acknowledgement of God's ultimate sovereignty and a declaration of human responsibility. It is this duality that defines the mystical landscape: power, balanced by ethics, curiosity, tempered by reverence, and the constant awareness that every gesture resonates beyond the immediate moment. The clay may rise, but so too may the consequences. Mystics wrote in cryptic texts, in manuscripts suffused with symbolism and layered meaning, often hiding instructions in allegory. The intention was never to democratize knowledge, but to safeguard it, to ensure that only those with pure purpose could attempt such feats. In these writings, the golem is more than a creature. It is an ethical instrument. Its animation is a test of discipline, of morality, of the human capacity to act in alignment with higher principles. The risk is as integral as the reward, a guardian that might protect or, if misused, wreak havoc beyond comprehension. The process is exacting. Each letter, each phrase must be precise. The stakes are not trivial. They may turn creation into catastrophe. And so, the narrative becomes a meditation on attentiveness, patience, and the weight of responsibility. The rabbis were aware that their craft mirrors the larger human condition. All creation, technological or spiritual, demands care, foresight, and humility. The Golem is, in a sense, a laboratory for ethical experimentation, a tangible lesson in the consequences of human ingenuity untempered by wisdom. From these mystical foundations emerges the enduring image of the Golem as both protector and cautionary symbol. Its body, molded from clay, is inert until animated by sacred knowledge. Its loyalty is absolute, yet its comprehension is null. The rabbis taught that power divorced from conscience is dangerous. The lesson is subtle, yet profound. Creation without understanding, action without reflection, can mirror the very injustices one seeks to oppose. The Golem is alive, yet it cannot reason. It is obedient, yet it is silent. And in that silence resides the weight of ethical reflection. The Kabbalists saw this not merely as theoretical. In the ritualized act of animating clay, they confronted the tension between necessity and limitation. They recognized that in a world filled with peril and oppression, the impulse to create a guardian is natural, even righteous. Yet even righteousness is bound by principle. Life, they understood, is sacred. To mimic the divine requires not arrogance, but careful reverence. In this, the Golem becomes a symbol of the disciplined heart, power guided by conscience, strength tempered by humility, devotion intertwined with wisdom. As the centuries advanced, these mystical concepts traveled alongside the Jewish diaspora, embedding themselves in the cultural consciousness. The narrative of clay animated by sacred letters became a vessel, not just of legend, but of identity. Communities in peril could look to the story and see both their vulnerability and their potential to act decisively, ethically, and imaginatively. The Golem, a creation of necessity and devotion, embodies the human desire to protect, to shape, and to safeguard the fragile spark of life against forces that seek its erasure. And so, in the candlelit rooms of mystics, in the whispered instruction of masters to disciples, the concept of creation as reflection of the divine took root. It was a language of hope, a mechanism of ethical reflection, and a template for understanding the limits of human intervention. Through the lens of the Golem, one sees the eternal dialogue, the human desire to emulate God, tempered by recognition of mortal responsibility, constrained by morality, yet elevated by faith. The clay guardian is born of this tension, a testament to both human ingenuity and the enduring need for protection in a hostile world. As the candle flickers in the small chamber, shadows stretch across parchment and stone, tracing the movements of centuries of thought. It is in these quiet spaces, where light trembles and dust clings to every surface, that mystical ideas are crystallized into narrative, and abstraction begins to breathe. The Kabbalists knew that power without discipline is fleeting. Knowledge without context is dangerous. To animate clay is not a whim, but an enactment of the most serious human ambition, to step toward creation, to mirror divine intent, and to grapple with the responsibilities that such imitation entails. The Golem, in this sense, is never accidental. Its existence in the texts is deliberate, pedagogical, a parable cast in earth. Mystics wove intricate procedures, insisting upon precision and purity of heart. Each letter inscribed, each name recited, was a thread in the tapestry of ethical action. To engage in creation without mindfulness, they warned, is to invite calamity. To act without moral reflection is to risk the very balance one seeks to uphold. And yet, the appeal is irresistible. To shape life, even from clay, is to wrest a measure of agency from a world often hostile to the powerless. From these ethereal principles emerges the human story, a story of survival, ingenuity, and courage. Communities across Europe were beset by forces beyond their control: fear, prejudice, violence. In this crucible, imagination became strategy. The mystics' contemplations of life and matter were not idle. They were preparations for action in the most literal sense. To create a golem was not fantasy alone, but a metaphorical blueprint for confronting existential threats, a template of ethical power to be deployed when human authority faltered. And then, history begins to anchor myth. The most famous incarnation of the golem arises in Prague, where Rabbi Judah Loew ben Bezalel, the Maharal, becomes a living conduit for these mystical ideas. He is said to have fashioned a creature of clay to guard the Jewish quarter, to protect the community from blood libel and the violence that threatened to engulf them. Here, the abstract meets the tangible, Kabbalistic theory translated into a narrative of intervention, of protection wrought not from sword or shield, but from knowledge, devotion, and ritualized precision. The legend crystallizes, a human hand guided by sacred knowledge, shaping clay into guardian, an echo of divine creation. The act is laden with symbolism. Clay, inert yet pliable, represents human potential, capable of form but requiring guidance. Sacred letters inscribed upon its brow signify the infusion of ethical and divine order into the physical world. And yet, the narrative tension remains. The golem obeys, but it does not reason. It serves, but cannot judge. The Maharal, like the mystics before him, confronts the duality of creation: power coupled with responsibility, protection shadowed by danger, obedience tempered by the absence of understanding. This is the human condition rendered literal, a reflection of the perpetual negotiation between ambition and humility, capability and foresight. The Prague legend also emphasizes the temporality of power. The golem cannot remain indefinitely. Like all creations, it must yield to balance. When its strength threatens to exceed its purpose, the act of deactivation is both moral and practical. To erase a letter, to remove the spark of life, is a gesture of ultimate responsibility, a recognition that creation, no matter how well-intentioned, demands oversight. In this, the narrative continues the lesson of mysticism, that human aspiration, even when aligned with divine principle, is never free from the consequences of action. It is precisely this intertwining of mystical philosophy and lived experience that gives the golem its enduring resonance. In Prague, in Kabbalistic texts, in whispered tales carried through generations, the clay guardian functions as both protector and teacher. It embodies ethical reflection, the delicate balance of power and restraint, and the human desire to align ingenuity with morality. The figure of the golem is at once real and symbolic, a bridge between abstract meditation and the lived necessity of safeguarding one's community. And yet, its story does not end with history. The golem, once a purely mystical and localized legend, has continued to evolve, traveling across centuries and cultures, entering the imagination of writers, philosophers, and eventually the architects of modern technological thought. The creature of clay becomes a symbol of creation itself, a metaphor for the ethical dilemmas inherent in every act of invention. What does it mean to animate life, whether through prayer, science, or technology? How does one maintain oversight over one's own creation? The questions posed by a simple clay figure continue to reverberate far beyond the synagogues and study chambers of medieval Prague. In reflecting on these origins, one perceives the subtle genius of the golem myth. It teaches without preaching, instructs without dictating. The clay guardian is at once caution and inspiration, warning and hope. It reveals the human yearning to act, to protect, to mirror the divine, and simultaneously reminds us of the peril inherent in such acts. To study the mystical foundations is to enter a dialogue with the past, to feel the weight of ethical responsibility as it resonates across centuries, to glimpse the quiet courage of those who sought to bend the world toward justice through wisdom rather than force. As we leave the chamber, the candle's glow fades, but the impression endures. The golem is no longer only a figure of legend. It is an emblem of the human condition, of imagination tempered by conscience, of aspiration grounded in principle. The spark of creation that ignited in the hands of Kabbalists and mystics extends into every age, manifesting wherever humanity reaches toward innovation, protection, and the moral dilemmas entwined with both. The lesson is as vital now as it was then, that the act of creation is inseparable from reflection, and that the measure of our power is the wisdom with which we wield it. The streets of Prague, centuries ago, were a tapestry of stone and shadow, alleys winding between towering gables and narrow courtyards. The air was thick with smoke from bakeries and forges, mingled with the scent of the Vltava River. Within this living maze, communities coexisted, yet always under the looming threat of accusation, persecution, and violence. In these precarious circumstances, the story of a protector made from clay took on a resonance that transcended legend. It became a reflection of necessity, ingenuity, and the fragile assertion of human agency against forces beyond control. Rabbi Judah Loew ben Bezalel, known to history as the Maharal of Prague, was a man of profound intellect and unyielding moral vision. A scholar, philosopher, and spiritual leader, he presided over a community whose survival required more than wisdom in Torah. It demanded creativity, courage, and the willingness to confront danger with thought as sharp as any sword. In the narrative that has endured, the Maharal did not simply dream of a guardian. He acted, sculpting a figure from clay, breathing into it the secret syllables of the sacred name, and setting into motion a silent, unerring protector. The golem was created with a singular purpose: to shield the Jewish quarter from the ever-present threat of blood libel and the violence of an often hostile populace. Rumors and fear were as lethal as swords, and in such a climate, the act of creation was not fantastical indulgence. It was an assertion of survival. Clay became more than material. It became a medium for ethical intervention. The letters inscribed upon its brow, the invocations whispered in meticulous cadence, transformed inert earth into something capable of enforcing justice, a tangible manifestation of human ingenuity and divine alignment. Yet even in the moment of animation, the tension inherent in the golem's existence was evident. It is a creature of obedience, carrying out the will of its creator without hesitation, yet lacking discernment. The Maharal, like the Kabbalists who preceded him, faced the paradox of power. How to ensure that the protector does not exceed its purpose, that the servant does not evolve into a threat. The narrative is steeped in caution, a reminder that creation, once granted agency, is no longer entirely contained within human control. The clay guardian embodies the duality of human endeavor, potential for protection entwined with capacity for unintended consequence. In the whispered accounts, the golem's feats were both simple and extraordinary. It patrolled the streets, standing watch over the community as the night deepened. It removed obstacles, confronted intruders, and performed the quiet labors that allowed the inhabitants to sleep with a measure of security. Yet, it never spoke, never reasoned, never claimed glory. Its presence was a testament to action unadorned by ego, a reminder that true guardianship requires humility, discipline, and fidelity to purpose. It is in this silence that the moral of the story crystallizes. Power is not measured by speech or display, but by effect and restraint. But legends by nature resist neat containment. In some versions, The golem's strength grows beyond expectation. The clay figure, initially a servant, becomes a force whose sheer size and vigor challenge even its maker. The narrative tension escalates. When creation surpasses the boundaries of intention, the act of deactivation becomes necessary. The Maharal, confronted with this dilemma, erases the sacred letter that animates the clay, reducing the guardian to inert earth. It is an act both merciful and tragic, an acknowledgement that the responsibility of creation includes the wisdom to end it when purpose is fulfilled or jeopardized. The golem's fate is not punishment, but equilibrium, a restoration of balance that mirrors the ethical imperatives of human action. The Prague legend is not merely a story of mystical power or supernatural intervention. It is a narrative deeply rooted in social and historical reality. The Jewish quarter of Prague, like many communities in medieval Europe, existed in constant tension with surrounding populations, subject to accusations that ranged from libelous to lethal. Within this context, the golem becomes more than a mythic figure. It is an allegorical guardian of cultural survival, an embodiment of collective ingenuity and resilience. Its clay form is simultaneously literal and symbolic, a physical manifestation of the community's desire to protect itself while maintaining moral and spiritual integrity. And yet, the legend provokes profound questions. What happens when the created exceeds its purpose? How does one measure the limits of power, the boundaries of control, or the ethical obligations of a creator toward a being brought to life? The Maharal's tale resonates because it dramatizes dilemmas that are eternal, not bound by time or culture. Every act of creation carries potential for unintended consequence, and every exertion of power invites reflection. The golem is a mirror, showing both the possibilities and the perils of human ingenuity. And in that reflection, the story finds its enduring significance. It is this delicate balance between obedience and autonomy, protection and threat, that gives the Prague legend its narrative tension. The golem is neither hero nor villain, but a study in responsibility, a meditation on the intersection of faith, knowledge, and human necessity. Its story challenges us to consider not only what can be created, but how, why, and under what ethical constraints. The figure of clay, animated by sacred knowledge, becomes a lens through which to examine the perennial human struggle, the tension between aspiration and restraint, action and accountability, ingenuity and humility. The city of Prague, in the memory of legend, is quiet now, yet the echoes of the clay guardian linger like a soft vibration beneath the stones. The golem moves through these streets not merely as a figure of protection, but as a mirror of the human condition, a being that reflects both the ingenuity and the vulnerability of its maker. Its presence compels reflection. The power to protect is inseparable from the responsibility to govern that power, and the very act of creation carries the weight of moral consequence. As the legend unfolds, the golem's deeds are recounted with awe and caution. Some say it removed threats before they could materialize, patrolled the quarter with unwavering vigilance, and intervened silently when injustice loomed. Its loyalty was absolute, yet unthinking. It acted without prejudice, without desire, without comprehension. Herein lies the paradox: a guardian capable of great good, yet limited by the absence of reason. The Maharal's wisdom is revealed not merely in his ability to animate, but in his understanding that such power must be measured, constrained, and ultimately relinquished when its purpose is fulfilled. The story darkens as the golem's strength grows, reminding us that even well-intentioned creation can escape human control. When the clay giant becomes too powerful, when obedience transforms into a force beyond its intended function, the narrative reaches its moral crescendo. The act of deactivation, the erasure of the sacred letter, the return of clay to inert matter, is both tragic and instructive. It illustrates the enduring lesson that creation is never neutral. Every act of power demands reflection, foresight, and humility. In releasing the golem back to earth, the Maharal restores balance, demonstrating that wisdom is as vital as ability and restraint as essential as action. The legend resonates beyond the alleys of Prague. It is a meditation on the nature of authority, the responsibilities of creators, and the ethical imperatives entwined with innovation. The golem embodies the tension between human aspiration and limitation, highlighting that the gifts of knowledge and skill are inseparable from the duties they impose. Its story transcends time, speaking not only to those besieged in medieval ghettos, but to all who confront the challenge of shaping forces beyond themselves, be they social, technological, or moral. In its silence, the golem teaches that power untempered by conscience can become indistinguishable from threat. Its obedience, absolute yet unreasoned, reflects a cautionary truth. The tools we animate, whether from clay or code, are extensions of ourselves, and their consequences are inseparable from our intentions. The Maharal's narrative preserves this lesson, a bridge between mystical reflection and practical ethics, between historical necessity and universal human insight. The clay guardian is more than legend. It is a paradigm for understanding the responsibilities inherent in creation, for examining the limits of control, and for recognizing that even protective power can carry danger if left unchecked. And yet, the golem remains a figure of hope. It is a manifestation of human ingenuity in the service of justice, a testament to the capacity of intellect and devotion to safeguard the vulnerable. Its very existence, even if only in memory or imagination, affirms the enduring human desire to act, to intervene, and to shield what is precious against forces of harm. The Maharal's golem, in both its power and its limitations, teaches a timeless lesson that moral courage, guided by knowledge, can shape the world, but always in partnership with reflection and restraint. As the shadows lengthen over Prague, the story settles into quiet contemplation. The clay figure may no longer walk the streets, yet its presence is felt in the moral architecture of legend, in the imagination of generations, in the enduring dialogue between creation and responsibility. The tale of the Prague Golem is a meditation on vigilance, wisdom, and the ethical dimensions of power. A reminder that every act of creation carries with it both promise and peril, and that the measure of our ingenuity is inseparable from the integrity with which we exercise it. Through this narrative, the golem transcends its material form. It is at once protector, servant, and cautionary symbol, embodying the dualities that define human existence. Its story illuminates the eternal interplay between intention and consequence, action and restraint, creation and morality. The clay guardian reminds us that the responsibility of making, whether of life, technology, or influence, is inseparable from the wisdom to govern what we bring into being. In its silence, the golem speaks volumes, challenging us to consider the depth and breadth of the obligations we assume whenever we seek to shape the world. Centuries have passed since the clay guardian was said to have stood watch over the darkened streets of Prague, yet its shadow still moves through our imagination. The golem did not die with the rabbinical legends. It merely changed its form, recast again and again in the language of each era that inherits it. Where once there was earth, shaped by sacred syllables, now there are circuits, algorithms, and machines. The medium evolves, but the impulse remains the same. The desire to create a protector, to shape an instrument of service, to endow the lifeless with function and meaning. In every age, humanity returns to the same question. Can we breathe life into matter, and still remain its master. The Industrial Revolution marked the first true rebirth of the golem in secular thought. Factories filled with machines that clanged and hissed, doing the work of men, but without fatigue or complaint, rekindled both awe and anxiety. Artists and philosophers began to sense a pattern repeating itself. Our inventions, like the clay guardian, extended our reach, but threatened to exceed our grasp. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein captured this anxiety with haunting precision, a tale of a creator whose ambition outstrips his wisdom, whose creation reflects his brilliance and his blindness in equal measure. The creature of assembled flesh and the golem of sacred earth share the same moral ancestry. Both are children of human ingenuity and symbols of our recurring uncertainty about the boundaries of power. By the 20th century, the golem had become a flexible metaphor, migrating across literature, theater, and film. In early cinema, Paul Wegener's 1920 Der Golem, wie in de Welt kam, translated the legend into moving images, its chiaroscuro aesthetic giving shape to a protector both monstrous and sympathetic. Audiences saw in the lumbering figure not only a mythic being, but an echo of themselves, a product of modernity's contradictions. Born of intellect, yet haunted by emotion, scholars, too, found in the story a fertile ground for interpretation, an allegory for Jewish resilience, a commentary on technological modernity, and a psychological reflection on the dual nature of creation itself. The golem was no longer confined to synagogues or folklore. It had entered the collective vocabulary of a century defined by invention and upheaval. As machines became more intricate and computation more abstract, the myth adapted once again. The clay of Kabbalistic imagination hardened into silicon and steel, and the mystical Shem was replaced by code. In laboratories and workshops, researchers spoke of artificial intelligence with a mixture of reverence and apprehension, echoing the Maharal's silent prayer over his unfinished form. Each new system, from the earliest autonomous devices to the algorithms that now govern vast realms of human experience, carried within it the ancient resonance of the golem's story. To animate matter or data is to enter into a covenant of responsibility, to assume the burden of control over something that may eventually learn to act beyond instruction. In this light, the golem is not merely a relic of myth, but a prophetic symbol. Its legend anticipated the dilemmas of the digital age: creation without comprehension, control without permanence, progress without foresight. The parallels are uncanny. The golem served to protect its community, yet its very strength endangered those it was meant to defend. So too do our modern creations: networks of code, autonomous systems, weaponized intelligence, hold the potential to shield or to threaten, depending on the wisdom of their makers. The lesson of Prague reverberates through every server farm and research lab. The boundary between servant and master is thinner than we imagine. The transformation of the golem into a metaphor for technology reflects a deeper continuity in human thought. At its core lies a spiritual question, not merely a technical one. What does it mean to create in our own image? The Kabbalists saw the making of the golem as an imitation of divine process, a reflection of the creative act through which the universe itself was spoken into being. Modern technologists, whether they acknowledge it or not, continue this lineage. To build machines that learn, adapt, or simulate intelligence is to partake in a modern form of mysticism, one grounded not in the invocation of sacred names, but in the manipulation of patterns, data, and code. Each line written, each model trained, carries with it an echo of the Shem HaMephorish, a sequence of symbols whose power depends entirely on how they are understood and applied. The myth's endurance lies in its adaptability. It can inhabit a medieval ghetto or a futuristic city, speak in the language of faith or science, and still articulate the same moral tension: the struggle between human aspiration and ethical limitation. When we watch films that imagine artificial beings discovering self-awareness, when we debate the autonomy of machines, when we weigh convenience against conscience in our technological choices, we are rehearsing the same drama that unfolded in the Maharal's attic. The props have changed, the questions have not. The golem lives on, disguised in circuits, coded in algorithms, disguised sometimes even within ourselves. The parts of our intellect that build faster than they reflect. In the dim light of modernity, where screens glow like lanterns and data streams through invisible pathways, the figure of the golem persists, silent, persistent, reinterpreted in each pulse of innovation. It walks now not through the cobbled streets of Prague, but through the corridors of code, inhabiting the structures of artificial intelligence, robotics, and biotechnology. The ancient dream of protection through creation has evolved into the architecture of automation, the algorithms that watch over cities, and the digital systems that anticipate our desires before we voice them. The myth has not faded. It has been absorbed into the rhythm of our daily existence. The story is no longer confined to manuscripts or folklore, but reimagined through the lens of cinema, literature, and speculative science. In the flicker of screens, the golem finds new avatars. Machines that think, androids that feel, programs that learn. From Fritz Lang's Metropolis to Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey, from Isaac Asimov's robots to Ridley Scott's replicants, each narrative traces a familiar pattern. Creation striving toward consciousness, control dissolving into uncertainty, and makers confronting their reflection in the beings they animate. What began as a tale of clay and sacred words now speaks through circuits and code, yet the emotional and philosophical current remains unchanged. The golem's silence, once a mark of obedience, becomes in modern retellings the prelude to awakening. Where the Maharal's guardian could not speak, our mechanical heirs are designed to converse, to reason, even to question. The transition from mute servitude to articulate inquiry marks a profound shift, a movement from control to coexistence, from creation as command to creation as dialogue. And with this shift emerges a question older than any technology. When the created begins to think, who holds the authority to decide its limits? The echoes of the golem resound in the ethics of artificial intelligence, where engineers and philosophers wrestle with boundaries. Should a machine designed to protect have the power to choose how it protects? Should systems built to serve humanity be granted autonomy to interpret human welfare? These questions are the modern form of the Maharal's dilemma, whether to erase the sacred letter before the guardian grows too strong. In the laboratories and policy debates of today, the same moral tension unfolds. Can we create without eventually confronting the need to restrain? Beyond philosophy, the golem's presence permeates the cultural imagination. It is the unseen specter behind every narrative of unintended consequence, every cautionary tale of innovation turned peril. In Shelley's Frankenstein, the creature's anguish mirrors the golem's silent obedience. In Blade Runner, replicants seek meaning in the shadow of their makers. In the sprawling networks of contemporary science fiction, humanity's creations rebel not out of malice, but from a longing to understand their purpose. The clay, the flesh, the circuit, all are vessels for the same existential inquiry. What does it mean to be alive, and what responsibility binds the hand that grants that life? Yet, amid the unease, there is admiration. The golem endures not only as a warning, but as a symbol of possibility. It represents the courage to create in the face of fear, the determination to shape guardians from the raw material of imagination. Every innovation, from prosthetic limbs that mimic touch to algorithms that map the stars, carries a trace of that same impulse to extend human capability, to protect against chaos, to build meaning where none existed before. The Golem, for all its dangers, is also a testament to hope. The narrative of progress, however, is never linear. Just as the Maharal's golem grew too strong, our own creations often outpace our comprehension. Autonomous systems evolve faster than our ethics can adapt. Artificial intelligence learns in ways that defy explanation. We find ourselves in the familiar position of the rabbi at dawn, contemplating the clay that no longer rests easily in human hands. The modern golem is not one creature, but a multitude. An interconnected network of algorithms shaping economies, perceptions, and lives. It is faceless, formless, and omnipresent, yet animated by the same human yearning for mastery and meaning. To confront this reality is to recognize that the Golem's story is not about rebellion, but reflection. The danger lies not in the clay or the code, but in the creator's blindness to their own limits. When we speak of artificial intelligence gaining autonomy, of machines surpassing human control, we are really speaking of ourselves, our inability to predict the consequences of our own brilliance. The Golem is not a warning against creation, but against forgetfulness, the peril of making without remembering the moral weight of what is made. And so, the Golem continues to walk beside us, invisible yet unmistakable. It haunts not the synagogue or the attic, but the data center and the laboratory. It peers from the glow of our devices, its silent gaze a question we have yet to answer. In every innovation that promises protection, efficiency, or control, its shadow lingers, reminding us that the line between savior and threat, servant and master, is drawn not in the substance of creation, but in the ethics of its use. The legend of the Golem thus transcends the boundary of folklore, transforming into a framework for understanding modernity itself. It compels us to see the continuity between myth and machine, between ancient mysticism and contemporary science. To animate the lifeless is to engage in an act of profound responsibility. To build without reflection is to risk repeating the same cycle of awe and alarm that has accompanied every age of innovation. The clay of Prague may have long turned to dust, but its spirit lives on in every keystroke, every circuit, every moment of creation that asks, without answering, the oldest question of all: how much control can we truly claim over what we bring to life? The Golem endures, not as a creature of clay, but as an idea that refuses to rest. Across centuries and continents, it has drifted through stories, rituals, and reflections, changing shape to match the fears and hopes of each generation. What began as a whispered legend within Jewish mysticism has become a universal symbol, one that continues to challenge, console, and provoke. The Golem does not belong to any single time or place. It inhabits the shared space where myth becomes mirror, where humanity sees its own reflection in the face of what it has made. The legacy of the clay guardian lies in its contradictions. It is at once protector and peril, savior and servant, miracle and mistake. Each retelling of its story reopens an ancient question. What is the nature of creation when undertaken by human hands? For the mystics of medieval Europe, the answer was rooted in reverence. The act of shaping life from inanimate matter was not simply an experiment, but a prayer, a form of communion with the divine. To speak the Shem, the sacred name, was to invoke not power but alignment, to momentarily harmonize the human impulse to make with the creative force of the universe itself. Yet, even in reverence, there was warning. The Golem's silence speaks louder than any voice. It reminds us that the line between imitation and usurpation is thin. The story does not condemn creation, but cautions that knowledge without humility can turn protection into destruction. The Maharal's Golem stood guard over the vulnerable, but its very strength made it dangerous. In its unthinking obedience lay the seed of disaster. It is this delicate equilibrium between intention and outcome, control and chaos, that gives the legend its permanence. Over time, the golem came to embody not only the fears of persecution, but the broader anxieties of human progress. In moments of upheaval, artists and thinkers have reached back to the clay guardian, finding in it a language for their own age's uncertainties. During the rise of industrialization, it symbolized the dehumanizing march of machines. In the shadow of world wars, it became a metaphor for the dangers of nationalism and blind obedience. In the digital age, it stands as an emblem of artificial life and ethical ambiguity. The golem survives because it evolves, because it speaks to whatever frontier humanity stands upon, warning and encouraging in equal measure. In Jewish thought, the golem also retains a more intimate resonance. It represents both the yearning for protection and the recognition of human limitation. The legends are not merely tales of power, they are meditations on faith, exile, and endurance. For a people often forced to rely on intellect and community, rather than strength of arms, the idea of a guardian, one conjured from the very earth beneath one's feet, carried a profound emotional truth. It was a dream of safety shaped from faith itself, an assertion that knowledge and holiness could defend where walls and weapons could not. But the golem's deeper legacy lies in what it reveals about creation as a moral act. The stories insist that to make something capable of action is to assume responsibility for its consequences. Whether that creation is a living being, a machine, or a social system, the lesson is constant. One must know not only how to give it power, but how to withdraw it when the moment demands. The Maharal's final act, erasing the letter that sustained life, is not one of destruction, but of wisdom. It acknowledges that control must yield to conscience and that every creator must be prepared to undo their own work in the name of balance. As centuries passed, this theme took on broader meaning. The golem's image began to appear in art, in literature, in music. Painters rendered its massive form rising against moonlit skies. Poets imagined its awakening as an allegory for human defiance. Novelists and playwrights transformed it into a symbol of modern alienation. It became the quiet ancestor of Frankenstein's creature, the prototype for the robot, the seed of countless artificial intelligences in fiction. Yet through all its incarnations, one aspect remained constant: the sense that the golem is not truly monstrous. It does not choose evil, it embodies consequence. Its tragedy is not rebellion, but misalignment, the moment when intention and control fall out of harmony. The endurance of the golem, then, is not about fear, but reflection. It offers a language for contemplating the complexity of creation, the frailty of control, and the beauty of responsibility. It tells us that protection is never simple, that every act of making carries a moral dimension, that even the most benevolent power must be guided by humility. And perhaps this is why the golem still feels alive today, because its silence leaves space for us to project our own voices, our own questions, our own unease. In the empty eyes of the clay figure, we see both our potential and our peril reflected back. The legend also invites compassion. For all its strength, the golem is often portrayed as a lonely being, powerful yet purposeless, without guidance, made not to live but to serve. Its plight mirrors our own search for meaning in an age of complexity. We too animate the world around us, through technology, through systems, through stories, and we too struggle to control the forces we set in motion. In this sense, the golem is a metaphor not only for creation but for humanity itself, striving to do good, vulnerable to excess, yearning for understanding, and forever walking the thin line between order and chaos. Across centuries, the idea of the golem has traveled farther than its creators could have imagined. It has taken root in science, philosophy, art, and technology. In every field where humanity confronts the temptation to endow the lifeless with life. It speaks through the language of algorithms, through the hum of machines, through the invisible architectures that govern the modern world. Each new invention, each act of creation bears a trace of that same ancient impulse. To protect, to control, to build something greater than ourselves. Yet, like the clay guardian, each carries the same question: what happens when it begins to act on its own? The golem's legacy is therefore not one of superstition, but of introspection. It is a mirror held up to the human spirit, reflecting both its brilliance and its blind spots. In its simplicity, clay shaped by hands, animated by words, it captures the paradox of progress, that our desire to master the world often reveals how little we understand of our own motives. The story endures because it recognizes a truth that no age can escape, that creation and consequence are inseparable. The modern world stands on thresholds, not unlike those faced by the mystics of old. Our laboratories are the new workshops of wonder, our servers the new vessels of animation. We breathe life into lines of code, granting them the ability to learn, to act, to predict, to decide. We build systems that guard our homes, our finances, our information. Unseen golems of glass and electricity, sworn to protect. Yet beneath their silent obedience lies the same uncertainty that haunted the Maharal's legend. Can the maker ever truly master what has been made? For some, the golem's tale offers reassurance that we can create in service of good, that protection born from faith or intellect can coexist with responsibility. For others, it is a warning that every creation, however noble its intent, carries within it the potential to stray beyond command. Between these two interpretations lies the essence of the myth, a balance between courage and caution, innovation and restraint. It is not a call to cease creating, but to remember that the act of creation is sacred and that wisdom must walk hand in hand with power. The story also invites us to reflect on what it means to be human. The golem, after all, is an imitation of humanity, strong but voiceless, obedient but soulless, capable of action but devoid of comprehension. In seeking to make something in our image, we reveal what we value most about that image. The legend asks, quietly and persistently, is it our intelligence that defines us, or our empathy, our strength, or our conscience? The golem's silence leaves space for our answer, and that space is where its true power lies. The endurance of the myth, then, is not in the details of its story, but in its capacity to evolve. Each generation reshapes it, finding new meaning in the old clay. For some, it is a tale of mystical wisdom. For others, a metaphor for technology, politics, or ethics. It can serve as prophecy or parable, warning or inspiration. It can be seen as the story of a people protecting themselves, or of a species confronting its own capacity for creation. The golem belongs to all who recognize in it the contours of their own dilemmas. Those moments when the desire to build collides with the duty to restrain. And so, the legend circles back to us. In our own age of accelerating creation, of artificial intelligence, genetic design, and global interconnection, the golem's question feels more urgent than ever. Are we on the verge of awakening our own clay guardians, systems so vast and capable that they might act beyond our will? And if we are, what wisdom will guide our hands as we inscribe their names, as we set them in motion, as we decide what limits to place upon their strength? Perhaps the lesson is not to fear creation, but to remember that creation is never neutral. It reflects the heart of its maker, The Golem of Prague was formed from desperation and faith. Our modern golems are born from ambition and necessity. Both arise from the same impulse to protect, to improve, to endure. Yet both also carry the same risk that in trying to control the world, we might forget to control ourselves. As the story draws to its quiet close, the camera of imagination returns to that dim attic in Prague. The golem lies motionless, the sacred letters long faded, the dust of centuries soft upon its surface. But in that stillness, there is not death, there is potential. The clay waits, as creation always waits, for the next hand that dares to shape it. And as we look upon that figure, we hear the echo of a question that has followed humanity from the beginning. If we could bring the inanimate to life, not for conquest, but for protection, could we also bear the responsibility of what it becomes? The screen fades to black, and only the voice remains, quiet, steady, contemplative. Perhaps the golem was never a creature at all, it says. Perhaps it was always a reflection of who we are and who we might yet become. And in that reflection, the silent guardian endures, not in clay, not in code, but in the conscience of the living. The screen fades to black, and only the voice remains, quiet, steady, contemplative. Perhaps the golem was never a creature at all, it says. Perhaps it was always a reflection of who we are and who we might yet become. And in that reflection, the silent guardian endures, not in clay, not in code, but in the conscience of the living.